My name is Wolfie Baby, and I'm hoping to release this video by tomorrow, May 8th, 2024, which will mark the 54th anniversary of the release of the album Let It Be by the Beatles. Also tomorrow, that Disney is going to release the original film Let It Be as cleaned up by Peter Jackson and originally directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. The album Let It Be was released on May 8th, 1970, but to understand it, you got to go back a little further. January 1969, the Beatles were planning to do a TV special. They started out at Twickenham Studios and ended up at EMI Studios for the month of January. Now, this story has been well chronicled in the original film Let It Be, but even more extensively in the 8-hour documentary by Peter Jackson, which is just amazing, and you really have to see it. They get together, they lay down a bunch of tracks with the idea of making it sort of a live in the studio jam album. By about the summer of 1969, those tapes had been worked on by Glyn Johns, one of their studio engineers. And the first attempt of them listening to a cohesive album was this, an unreleased album. This particular copy is from the 2021 Let It Be Deluxe box set on vinyl. They went back to where they took the picture at EMI and they recreated the pose from Please Please Me. It was sort of ready for release by around the end of 1969, but the Beatles weren't impressed with the mix or the selection or whatever, or maybe the artwork. But this album was never released, and we didn't get to listen to it until that box set came out. Almost immediately, tapes started leaking out of those Let It Be sessions. So there are a bunch of bootleg variations of those sessions. This one I picked up in 1980, just because it's so cool. It has an actual piece of film here that's supposed to be a clip of the Beatles, but I haven't been able to identify exactly where it's from. A lot of these, I noticed, had different pictures, different photographs like this, and it was meant to look like a file. In fact, just called File Under the Beatles. Sessions, another bootleg. Again, a lot of the songs from the Get Back sessions. And Commonwealth, which I got a kick out of hearing them do on the Peter Jackson documentary. This is a double album. Came out a nice colored vinyl. It's a 1987 bootleg on Shogun Records. This one's red and the other disc is yellow. 2003, we got Let It Be Naked. This was sort of like a Paul project and his take on the Let It Be album and how he would have mixed it. Because there was a lot of discussion that, a lot of friction between him, John and Heorge, that Phil Spector had ruined some of his songs. He liked his creative control. From the 2021 Let It Be box set, more Apple Sessions and Apple Jams. And also in that, an EP. Has Across the Universe, Don't Let Me Down. 4 songs in total. January 1969, John Lennon records Instant Karma, produced by Phil Spector. And he was so taken with their work relationship and Phil's results with that single that he and Heorge asked Phil to come on board and take a look at what he could do with their tapes. You see, the movie was supposed to be released in May of 1970, and they really wanted to get that soundtrack that had been moldering around for a year now going. May 8th finally rolls around. Phil Spector does his magic and we get the first press UK of Let It Be, which is in that box set that I showed last week. There's a video, it's part 2, thank you Mr. Stickermania. You can see the whole elaborate box set, but because of the elaborate packaging of the material, it sold for £3, which I guess was a lot of money back then for an album. And 6 months later, the UK released on November 6th a single album copy of Let It Be. It's not a gatefold, it's just a regular album. And by that time, they had changed the apple to a green one. This original Let It Be, the first issue, in England, it was the first one to come out with a red apple. So the November issues had a back to a greenish apple. So this is my UK copy of that. This is my first copy of Let It Be. It's a 1978 Winchester reissue of the album, and as it was in the United States, had a nice gatefold. Pictures from the recording session. Red apple on the back. And actually, on the album itself. I also have another 1978 UK reissue of Let It Be, but this one's on white wax. This one gets a good rep for having high sound quality. From the 80s, I have yet another copy of Let It Be. This is from my BC 13 box, which is the box that contains all the stereo versions of the Beatles. The last all analog release of Beatles albums, stereo recordings, from about 1983. I have the original master recording from MoFi. This is the cover. They released a book that had all the covers, but the covers to the albums themselves were pictures of the master tapes. It's pretty cool because in the details, when you break out your magnifying glass, you can see when they were signed out, like if, you know, for what country they were being used for what pressings. So it came like this from this black box set over here. I don't know if that's in view of the camera. A lot of people criticize this for the sound quality. I'm gonna have to re-examine that. I mean, they sounded tremendous to me. Something off with the EQ. My final copy from the 2021 deluxe box set that actually had 5 different discs, which I showed that Apple Jams and Apple Sessions was a double album. This is the 2021 Let It Be box. Now, in preparation for this video, I listened to 3 of my Let It Be albums. I listened to the UK first press that I received last week. I listened to my 1978. And I listened to this 2021. I listened to both sides, but when I got to the Long and Winding Road on the American and the UK issues, I felt that Long and Winding Road was a little bit challenging to the stereo. It sounded a little bit muddy. But then I put this one on, and as far as best sounding, to me, I don't care whether it's digital or what happened, but from the first notes of The Long and Winding Road, the piano notes that just go underneath when he first starts singing The Long and Winding, you just hear a few individual piano notes. I've never heard them so clearly, and it sounded like the best possible jazz recording, where I almost felt like the weight of the piano keys. And there were some parts near the end of that song where Paul sings that all of a sudden when I heard it on this album, I stood up, because you hear Paul, you left me waiting here, and then you hear him sing, don't leave me waiting here. And I worked my way backwards to all the other versions, and it's there, but you really have to listen to it. But on this version, the tap dancing of Ringo on the cymbals, the bass and the clarity, just, yeah, this I would have to pick as the sonic winner. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope I didn't bore you. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. Happy 54th to Let It Be. Bye. Take care.